Your Jacksonville Jaguars had a major need coming into the offseason that they admitted. Have they fixed their physicality or lack thereof? We'll talk about it here on Locked On Jaguars.
You are Locked On Jaguars, your daily Jacksonville Jaguars podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Locked On Jaguars, where it's your team every day. And we always thank you for making us your first listen. I am Tony Wiggins, the host of the Locked On Jaguars podcast. And I'm going to let you know right now, you can go on over to YouTube on the Locked On Jaguars page, subscribe, like, and then tap in with that bell so that you will get notifications each and every time we drop an episode. And wherever you get your podcast, make sure you listen for those audio podcasts every single day and check that location to ensure that you don't miss an episode, because we don't want you to miss anything. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started. And shout out to the everydayers for joining us here every day. And you can be one if you join us every single day. All right, let's get to it. Here's what we're going to talk about. The Jaguars had a major need going into the offseason. We all knew what it was, but they absolutely admitted it, that they were soft, basically. They lacked strength and physicality. And we want to see if they have addressed that so far and to give us an idea of what they might also think about with the NFL draft coming up. Trade scenarios, a lot of stuff being floated out there about maybe moving up into the top 10 and grabbing a wide receiver, the wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3, if that becomes available, and they might want to move up. I think Chicago is most likely. Chicago and Atlanta are probably the most likely destinations that they could go up to, and that's 8 and 9. And the reason why I say the Bears, because the Bears lost some of their second-round picks. Some of the ammunition, they lost that ammunition when they made it the trade for Montez Sweat last year. So we'll discuss that. Also, the number 17. Go by the numbers. What's in a number? Let's take a 5 or 6 year look back at the historic draft history of that pick number 17. What does that have to do with this year's pick? Absolutely nothing, but we're going to have some fun with it looking back. But also to remind you a little bit that not everything that we do pre-draft always ends up being that way post-draft. And once the seasons start and these guys start accruing minutes and snaps, if you look back, a whole bunch of picks that were picked in the first round and lauded by guys like me and other analysts turned out to not be very good. So sometimes we forget that we get caught up with much ado about nothing by looking at this process. But let's go back to the first thing that we were going to discuss, and that is, have the Jags addressed physicality? Now, I'm going to give you some history of this. All year, I mainly saw it. When I noticed that they kept playing these. Every time they played a good team, that they get pushed around, right? Whether it be Cincinnati on Monday night, Houston early in the season, Kansas City, and then the game that really stuck out was the 49ers game. And if anybody remembers, I came and did I did a postcast show, and one of the things that I said is they got a problem they can't fix. Ain't no health or amount of coaching going to change it. They didn't have no hind parts. I said they need some sandbags in their pocket, and they just don't have them. I said they can't fix it till the offseason. I came on here that Sunday. They went to 8. They were 8-3 heading to the game. They dropped to 8-4. I said, don't let that record fool you. These Jaguars have a serious problem. And the one that they had is something you just cannot overcome in the National Football League, especially when you talk about trying to go to the playoffs. And that is, if you cannot move people on the offensive line, and if you can't stop people from moving you when you're on the defensive line, there is no way you're going to have sustained success and even try to chase a championship. That is just not going to happen. I don't care what happens. And sure enough, both Doug Peterson and GM Trent Baalke came out and said, we've got to be more physical. And the big deal that I made about all of that was, well, why aren't you physical? Mr. Trait's GM, this is your team. You've been building them for 3 years now. How can you have a team that's not physical and you basically turned the entire roster over? That question really has still never been answered, and Trent probably won't answer it because he has a policy that he doesn't look backwards, which is the weirdest thing I've ever heard in my life. But that being the case, the question now is, have they addressed it? Have they got more physical in free agency? I think that process started with Mitch Morse. Uh, it started again, even though you don't need a wide receiver to be, when you talk about a wide receiver, you don't want him to talk about blocking. You want him to talk about catching balls. But Mitch Morse at center, two guys from Buffalo, and Gabe Davis. Yeah, sure. Gabe Davis is known as sort of a physical receiver. He blocks really well on the outside. And that's more than I can say for the rest of those receivers. They're kind of small and kind of frail. They're not really those types that could do that. And then Evan Ingram is a pass catching tight end, and blocking isn't really his strong suit. So they almost got no blocking from anybody other than the line. And then one of those guys, the center, wasn't even doing no blocking. So they just didn't have a lot of people on offense that were pushing people around. I think we all agree with that. Defensively, with Eric Armstead, they got more physical. Of course they did. But here's the thing. They just extended Roy Robertson Harris last year. And what they're paying Armstead and what they're paying RRH, that's fine. It ain't no big, it's no big deal. That's and with Devon Hamilton, that's pretty decent money allocated to those three defensive linemen and those interior guys. But if they weren't physical, why did they re-sign Roy Robertson Harris when they needed another guy? I just don't. At some point, you know what you have in a person, and you can't keep keeping too many of those dudes around just to keep them around and paying them a little bit more money than what you were paying them before, because it's almost as if you can't upgrade, right? They were able to do it this year with Eric Armstead, of course, with a very, very team-friendly deal. And I think it's a little luck and fortune that it turned out that way, that he was even available in the first place. But never mind the fact they got him. So is it physical? So I'm going to give you a little bit of some homework on this and why I'm not shocked that they didn't just totally go all out to address this need. Last year, going into the offseason after the 2022 season, the thought was they needed more pass rush. Doug Peterson said we need to improve our pass rush. That's the number one priority. And they didn't add anybody. Other than drafting Yasir Abdullah, they didn't add anybody. They rolled with what they had already. And it improved, right? So was he really saying that Josh Allen needed to get his act together while they were still affording Trayvon the liberty to grow up? Because I can tell you on at least two occasions, Doug Peterson said they were fine with Trayvon, that Josh had to pick it up. I was right there at the press conference when he said it. And last year was actually the first year in 3 seasons that Josh Allen did get double-digit sacks. So at that point, I thought that what they were saying was that the thing that they were going to address from a personnel standpoint was the edge. And I think everybody else thought that too. And guess what? It never happened. But improvement did happen. So am I to believe that when they say that they need to address their physicality, do they just need to add just one or two pieces on both sides of the line of scrimmage and then have all of those guys that they re-signed and they're committed to just play better? Is that what and they're going to get a healthy Devon Hamilton back, and the offensive line hopefully won't have as many injuries. So will they become more physical with minimal additions, but with a different scheme that doesn't have them backing up, that has them coming downhill defensively, and with better health and better continuity and hopefully a good offseason in terms of conditioning? Is that going to be how they get more physical? Does it mean that they're just going to get DBs that tackle better? Is it all going to be schematic? Or do you think, or do I believe that they're not done yet? No, I don't think they're done yet. I don't. I absolutely do not think they're done yet. And if I think about it too much longer, I'm going to sit here and try to tell you that I believe they're going to take an offensive or defensive lineman at some point in day one or day two. We'll discuss that and more, including trade scenarios. I've heard. I haven't heard anything. Let me clear that up. There are a lot of people that I like, that I follow on social media, that are sitting here clamoring for the Jaguars to trade up for either to get in the position to take Malik Neighbors or Rome Odunze. We'll see how that shakes out, and we'll do it here in segment 2 on Locked On Jaguars. Today's show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Man, I've used therapy, and it has absolutely worked for me through a lot of hard situations. One that I never really thought about was time management. Time management is serious business, especially when you have loved ones and things that you like to do. But sometimes you don't seem to be able to find the time to make your schedules match up, and it can create some anxiety for you. Well, therapy can help in that respect as well. A lot of us spend our lives wishing we had more time. The question is, time for what? If time was unlimited, how would you use it? The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. And BetterHelp can help you do that. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. All right, second segment here on Locked On Jaguars, segment number 2. That is here on Locked On Jaguars, where it's your team every day. We love to thank you for making us our first listen. Have they addressed the physicality? We'll have to see. But that's a good question, because if they don't believe that they have adequately addressed the physicality, then they'll need all of their draft picks. They're already down 1 third-round pick, but then I think they got another pick, a compensatory pick in the 3rd round for the Jawan Taylor. And so that's a 1, 2, 3, or 4. They need them all. They need them all. Because if they don't continue to address it in the draft, then that would mean that they literally just added one guy on the line of scrimmage on each side of the ball to address a problem that they all admit, and we all admit that we saw that they had. So if they're going to trade up, folks seem to think that the thing that's worthy to trade up for is one of those top 3 wide receivers to continue to give Trevor Lawrence more weapons. I mean, logic says that they were in it for Calvin Ridley and trying to re-sign Calvin Ridley, and when that did not work, that left them with something that they were without, something that they really, really wanted. And then you heard rumors of them having discussions, which I haven't confirmed, but I believe people when they say that they talked to the 49ers about Brandon Ayuk, but didn't want to give up what the 49ers are asking for and then have to give Ayuk a big contract. So that would mean that they're still in the mood for an explosive wide receiver, a true number 1 wide receiver, and this draft has some at the very top. I think that there's some that's going to be in the back that's going to surprise you. If folks really think about this throughout history, and we'll talk about from a historical context, we'll talk about what pick 17 means. But without even thinking about that, just think about it like this. T. Higgins, the one that everybody wants, T. Higgins was a 2nd-round pick. Brandon Ayuk was a late 1st-round pick. We can even go back to DeAndre Hopkins, late 1st-round pick. The number 1 receiver in most people's eyes in the league is Justin Jefferson, late 1st-round pick. So we get caught up sometimes in this draft where we think in order to get something, you have to go up and you have to move up and get it where we know those things dwell, right? Like at the top of the draft. You want a superstar, you got to go up. That's not necessarily true. Although if your team does have problems drafting and just aren't very good at it, you would think that they'd have better luck if they moved up, right? But if they move up, it's going to cost them things. It's going to cost them prime resources, and those resources won't allow for them to be able to fill their roster out with more physical players by going up and getting a wide receiver like Neighbors or a wide receiver like O'Dunes that will give Trevor Lawrence give him a running mate for the next 5 years, somebody that he can look at and say, that's my number one guy. That's where I'm going the ball. And I do think that that's something necessary for the Jacksonville Jaguars and what they need. However, I happen to think that those teams that are sitting up in those positions like Chicago and Atlanta, they're going to keep those picks. And those teams need game breakers also. And I don't think that those teams will move down unless they fall in love with somebody who's in that second tier in terms of what everybody is prognosticating and what everybody is assuming is going to happen in the draft. And the Jaguars have to give them at least a second round pick to come up. And I think it'll probably cost them more than that. To come up from 17 to go into the top 10 is going to cost you a 2. It's going to cost you that pick, obviously. It's going to cost you probably the 48th pick and then another day 2 pick or an early day 3 pick next year or this year. So, you're going to give up something. The one thing about doing this all the time is it seems like when it's time to give up compensation, everybody wants to get real stingy, right? And I get it. But you can't get something for free. It's going to cost you. And what's going to cost the Jaguars if they happen to do it, they're going to get a heck of a player if they were able to pull this off. But what it'll also do is it'll limit how much they're able to build this roster out moving forward. And I don't know if you addressed overall team physicality by adding one guy on each side of the line. Now, I know I'm going to get inundated with people telling me, well, maybe the guys lifted more. Maybe they're healthier. Maybe that's what Trent means. Well, Trent also said this, and think about it now. So we're not trying to have a gotcha moment here as much as we're trying to get clarity and understanding. He said at the combine, guys are born physical. You can't create them. Basically, paraphrasing something like that, right? So if the guys you have aren't physical, you can't change them and make them more physical. Basically, if I'm reading the tea leaves correctly and reading between the lines, that's sort of what he said. You can't have it both ways and flip-flop and try to change your mind whenever it's convenient for you to make a point. So if anybody wants to tell me, no, Wig, you're dead wrong, man, those guys can be more physical. Well, your GM said the guys who aren't physical you can't make them physical once they get to the league. They're born that way. So you got to draft them. You got to identify them. For the life of me, I can't understand that. If he didn't know that he's been a GM in this league for a long time and a scout in this league for a long time, why did he just figure that out? And why didn't he draft more physical players? I'm sure that somewhere in there's a story of compromise between him and other people in the building, and that he probably didn't get everything that he wanted. It's still his job to make sure that he stands firm and he's 10 toes down with what is best for the football team and don't do too much compromising. Even though we want them all to work together, we cannot afford to have Trevor Lawrence behind a line that is not physical. He should have never been in that situation, but he's been in that situation now for a couple of years. Travis Etienne missed his whole rookie year because of a freak accident with a Liz Frank. And since he's been back those 2 years, he's been running for his life because that same line that blocks for Trevor Lawrence blocks for him. And he had some success in 2022, but not so much in 2023. He did okay, but it still wasn't what everybody expected. And I think he probably got hit more than anybody did before he was able to even, as soon as he got the ball. I mean, he's contacted in the backfield most of the time. So it's incumbent that I think they build a draft out. I wouldn't move up. I'd stay sitting right where I am and take the best player available, the one that's big and strong and makes you better. That's probably what I'd do if I was the Jacksonville Jaguars. You can keep up with what every team around the league is doing. If you're watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day, and you had to turn it down when the volume is all that screaming and shouting that those guys do, love them to death, but make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the Free Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. All right, third final segment coming up here. And what we're going to talk about is we're going to take a historic look at the number 17. That's right. What were some of the picks that were picked in the last 5 or 6 years at pick number 17? I'll tell you what it was, and we'll go over it in just a second here on Lockon Jaguars. We got to tell you about FanDuel, man, because FanDuel is the absolute truth. And if you get down with FanDuel right now, during this run of the Final Four in both men's and women's sports, new customers get $200 in bonus bet with any winning $5 bet. That's right. Any winning $5 bet gets you $200 in bonus bets. The sports calendar is loaded, and FanDuel makes it even more exciting to get in on the action. Now you got women's basketball, men's basketball. You got teams fighting in the NBA trying to get into the playoffs, at least into the play-in tournament, and it is going down to the wire. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a big win. FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. All right, third and final segment here on Lockon Jaguars, where it's your team every day. In the first 2 segments, we talked about have the Jags addressed physicality enough, and then trade scenarios, things that I'm hearing from people I trust, not people behind the scenes, other people that do what it is I do here, right? We have we've gotten to the point where everybody now are throwing out scenarios where they think the Jaguars can move up or move back or mainly move up and probably try to target a wide receiver. That would be very, very outside of the box and different, because Trent Baalke doesn't have a history of drafting wide receivers very well. And for him to take a swing at it and move up, it would be something that is not very Trent Baalke-like. But just for the sake of this show and exercise and the fun that we absolutely have talking about where guys get picked and how they usually turn out in the NFL, I'm going to go back to 2015 with this one. And I didn't even know this until I just looked at it. And this is going to be almost perfect. Pick number 17 in 2015 was made by the San Francisco 49ers, and it's Eric Armstead. Ain't that something? Ain't that something? Isn't that a coinkydink, or a coincidence as they call it? Yeah, it's fun that I turned this up, and I was just going to go back 5 or 6 years, but I saw Eric's name there, and I thought that I'd share that with you. It's Eric Armstead, the new Jacksonville Jaguar defensive tackle. What are we saying here? Big coincidence, but that's also very cool. All right, 2016, Keanu Neal had an up and down career. It was pretty good at the beginning, moved around a little bit. I think he's back at DB, but still in the league. Jonathan Allen, the defensive tackle for the Washington Commanders. Derwin James for the Chargers. Dexter Lawrence for the Giants in 2019. 2020, CeeDee Lamb. Woo. And that's another example of getting a guy that may not be in the top 10, but I think CD was the first receiver taken in this draft too. But look, he might not have been, but look at that. One of the 5, 6, 7 best receivers in the league, and they didn't have to move up for him. He fell right to him in this draft. Alex Leatherwood may be the one that it's one of those Mike Mayock picks. It may be the one that you go, okay, out of all the ones we just mentioned, that's like the worst one, right? In 2022, Zion Johnson, very good player. Very good player that I think Jim Harbaugh is going to really, really love out there with the Chargers. And last year at 2023, it was Christian Gonzalez. Had a very, very good start. A very good start to his draft. Got hurt. We'll have to see if he bounces back, but I believe what we saw was a very, very good indicator that he's going to be a pretty good player. So there's your DB, your corner. So if we look at the DBs and mainly the corners, Christian Gonzalez, the other DBs so far were safeties. Go all the way to 2022, where you get Phillip Buchanan, but 17 wasn't the spot where You see a whole bunch of other guys. The David Pollock, who got hurt and got injured, along with Jonathan Allen and Eric Armstead are the other guys. And then with the linemen, and these are all positions of need that I'm talking about with Jags, with the linemen, Nate Solder, Mike Upati. Yeah, so traditionally what has happened is there have been some very good players. Zion Johnson, we mentioned Leatherwood too. That didn't really pan out. But in terms of wide receivers, CeeDee Lamb, and you got to go all the way back to 2003, and that's Brian Johnson before another wide receiver was taken. So not a lot of wide receivers sitting there at 2017, but all of these drafts aren't monolithic. Some of them are very, very different. And therefore, the Jaguars will have a chance to get a really, really good player. When we look at the big boards, now the big boards that we have are not the ones that the team have. So everybody's doing the best that they can to put it together for entertainment purposes as well as up for other reasons. But one of the things that you notice is there's usually right at 17, there's wide receivers, DBs, those offensive linemen, probably all of the defensive tackles are still going to be there at that point. And maybe there's a chance that edge rusher 2 or edge rusher 3 is still there, depending on what the run is on some of these positions. So, look, if they sit right where they are, they're going to get an impact player that has a chance to be super, super good in the National Football League. And that's the way I would go, because I still think the Jaguars have many needs, most of them because the Jaguars really haven't addressed their overall team physicality. You can't just get one guy and think that that makes you physical when you're not. I think it has to be something that you attack across the board. So we'll see how that goes. Pick number 17, we see it. We talked about trade scenarios and have the Jaguars address the physicality. I can tell you what you can do, and that is pay attention to the fact that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. You guys, thanks for joining me here for another edition of Locked On Jaguars. We'll continue to beat down doors and find out information. I might have my boy Demetrius Harvey come on with me, and a couple of other guys, local guys, doing really, really good work from the journalism side. I'm going to reach out to them and see if we can start doing a little bit more roundtable here to try to get you all primed up and ready. I don't mind sharing the stage, getting you all primed up and ready for the NFL draft. All right, you guys take care of each other until the next episode, which will be tomorrow. I'll see you, and thanks for joining Locked On Jaguars.